Hey, what's up guys? It's Milne FPV here. Yeah, I did a thing. I ended up crashing my Cinebot30 down an elevator shaft. I ended up breaking one of the front arms. You can see there it's not level anymore. Broke the frame in a couple spots and sheared off some of the screws, including one of the ones that goes up in this aluminum housing here. So they've got parts available online. I could have gotten everything separately, but it got to a point where I figured I just get a whole new kit. You know, I figured take everything apart, swap it into the new frame. I don't think I'm gonna have to do any soldering, so I'm not gonna cover any of that unless we have to. But you know, I thought maybe get some helpful tips out of it. So let's get to it. There you go, disassembly complete. All right, here's the brand new kit, the replacement kit. Again, it's from GEPRC, Cinebot30. So let's just open up, we'll go through what's in this thing. So you got a battery strap, antenna tube, another battery strap. You got two different sizes depending on what batteries you're flying. Antenna leads, shrink tubing. Bag of miscellaneous screws and press nuts, your gimbal balls, that kind of stuff. Got a cool little keychain there. You got some power leads if you wanted to run your naked GoPro off your balance plug, off your battery. You have little adapters in there to do that, as well as a little GoPro. I believe that mounts just for the GoPro naked. It doesn't work for the full size, because I ended up ordering one separately. But yeah, you got some motor wire tubes in there. Just a miscellaneous bag of stuff. Looks like you got your motor TPU, vibration plates in there, your antenna tube, antenna holder, that kind of stuff. That stuff's all made out of TPU. You got your aluminum housing for your O3 camera up front, and you got to assemble that. You got the frame. So you get the housing, like where all the electronics go here, and then the blade guards. That's like the basic frame of the kit there. And then you got your carbon fiber pieces, your top plate, your bottom plate, and then your GoPro plate, or whatever camera choice you're using. So like you get some miscellaneous stickers from GEPRC, that's cool. Just an exploded view, and then, you know, that tells you what size screws. But it was kind of difficult, if I remember correctly, putting this thing together. I eventually figured it out, and I think I watched a few other videos online on YouTube to figure it out, but not super helpful, but could be worse. And then this is the actual GoPro mount that I ordered. It's optional. It doesn't normally come in the kit, but I didn't order it the first time, and I wish I would have, because I had it rigged on. There was like zip ties and another mount. But anyways, yeah, you get a bolt, nut, little wrench, Allen wrench, and then that's the actual GoPro mount there. So that's it. That's what you get in the kit. Let's we'll start tearing into this stuff and put this thing together. All right, I like to start out by putting like all the little crimp nuts in their respective spots. So this first part is going to be your camera plate that's held on by the little gimbal balls. And these are the M2 times 1.9. They're called crimp nuts. So this little top plate takes 4 of them. And the reason you're putting these in is if you're using this GoPro mount, the optional GoPro mount, you're gonna have screws that go through this TPU, through this plate, and then into these press nuts. Maybe we'll do a little hammer. Those look like they're in there pretty good. While we're here, we'll take our gimbal suspension balls. There's gonna be 4 of those. I like to just get a lot of this little stuff done, so when we go to put them in later, it's ready to go. So this can be a little tricky, but just get it started and then you can pull the little flange through. There we go. And again, this is the optional GoPro mount. And it comes with its own little set of screws. So here is the GoPro bolt and nut. We'll just put this in there right now so we don't lose it. And there is your camera mount completed. All right, the next piece we have is our top plate. And it's gonna need some press nuts, or this bag is called M3 rivet nuts. You can see that these 4 holes right here are recessed for these rib nuts, and in the end this guy is going to get bolted up, probably actually this way, but those rib nuts are going to be on this side for the screws to come through. Go. Those guys are in. We'll set that off to the side. All right, next up, it's going to be the main frame, and in these unit head bright edge standoff, M2 times 25. Yeah, basically for now, you're just going to slide them through these holes, and they're going to be somewhat tight, but not too bad. And you can see how I push that one down too far. You can actually push it back up so they're flush in there for now. All right, next up, we're gonna be building the front camera housing where the O3 air unit sits, or whichever camera you're going with. This bag, and you've got the yellow motor vibration dampeners, but then there's these little black camera molded inserts. And this is to reduce the vibration for that O3 air unit. I'm sorry, the O3 air unit camera. Well, we don't need any other parts out of this bag. But the other bag you need are for these super ultra small screws to hold this top plate on the top of the camera housing. And those are going to be the M2x3 screws. And I do remember being a little confused on how this goes together. The first time I built it, and luckily we have the old piece still together, so we can look and see, at least the way I built it before, is this little protrusion goes forward on the camera. I do like to use thread locker. But yeah, if you don't put this stuff on over time, these might vibrate loose. So yeah, you can use the red or the blue. The blue's a little weaker, red's a little stronger. So yeah, some of the screws were a little tough to get out, but we did it. Remember having a hard time figuring out which way these went in. We'll use the old part to figure out how they go in, and I think that's the way they get inserted here in the inside. That should work. All right, the next thing we're going to be doing is prepping the antenna and the antenna holder for the O3 air unit. So in this bag with all the TPU parts, you have that little antenna holder for your video transmitter antenna, and then you have this antenna holder for your receiver antenna. I remember it being a little bit of a pain in the butt, and I still have my stuff mounted. Don't want to have to take it apart because it is kind of a pain in the butt, and these wires are delicate. But if yours isn't already put together like mine, you're building this from scratch, then at this point, this is when you want to do it. So basically, like, here's your video transmitter antenna block. The antenna wires have to come up through they have to pass through there. And the only way to do that is to take your O3 air unit. There's two little tiny Phillip head screws right there. You have to remove those screws, take this plate off, and then your antenna wires will pop off. You have to like use a little flat bladed screwdriver to pop them off super delicately, pass them through this piece, reconnect them, and then put this plate back on and screw it down. So I don't want to have to do that again, so I'm not going to show you guys, but at this point, that's what you would want to do. Then your antenna just slides in this hole on here. And there's multiple holes for different types of antennas. Like there's these two holes to come out, but for the O3 air unit, it uses that center hole there. So that's that piece. The other thing that has to go through is your receiver antenna, and they're all a little different. So depending on what you have, there is a pass through, there's a little bit of give. You can see how this thing will separate. There's built-in little channels for whatever the different antennas you're doing. But at any rate, you have to pass this through at some point, and you might be able to pass it through with this little T on there still. You pass it through the bottom there, and you might not. You might have to, like before you shrink wrap your receiver like mine is, you might have to pop that antenna off, pass it through this hole, connect it, and then shrink wrap your receiver. But at any rate, this is the point, like if you want to prep everything like I'm doing before you put it together, this is that point when you want to do that. Since we already have these pieces, I'm going to set these aside, but I just wanted to show you that so you guys are ready for it. All right, so now that we have a lot of the prep work done, I think we're at the point where we want to mount our flight controller. So yours, most likely, if you're starting from scratch, isn't going to be all soldered up like mine is. But I had done this all previously on the old frame. But you definitely want your battery wire coming off the back. Some guys will mount it through this hole. They'll put it through the hole, then solder it. I didn't want to do that in case I ever had to do some maintenance on this. So mine actually goes behind this arm, and then I just zip tied it there. So this is the point where we're going to put the flight controller on this top plate. And the screws that you're going to use are the M211s. And then you're also going to use the 4 of these M2 nuts. And this would be a good time to put your battery strap on, because once you put this flight controller on, it's going to be really hard for you to pass the battery strap through this. So if this is the front of the quadcopter, I believe I had it coming through like that. Battery goes sideways like the toilet tank. And I think you have the option of mounting it the other way. But when I looked up how they had them built on their website, they had their battery strap like this. But just to show you how this is going to go so you can position it right, because once you put your flight controller in, this is actually pretty tight and hard to adjust. So you want to get it in the ballpark before you mount everything. But yeah, like have this buckle kind of right on the corner of your battery like that. Yeah, you can see that there. So I guess it depends on what battery you have and which way you mount it. But I had good results mounting it this way. This is the GEPRC 1100s, 60C, 6S, into the high voltage, so you can charge these to 4.35. So been pretty happy with them so far. So we'll get that situated, flip her over, and then of course it's going to make it kind of a pain to work on now, but whatever. But I'm not going to crank that thing down yet. Get these guys lined up. I can't remember if I use Loctite on these nuts. They're tightening against these gummies, these little gummy pass-throughs. So you don't want to crank them down too much because you want them to do their job, but you don't want them to come loose. So I think maybe once I get these all on here, I might throw a little dab of thread locker on them. And you probably won't have all your motors and stuff flopping around like I am, because you won't have done that yet. But I do. I'm fortunate that I've already done this. I'm building this after I've crashed it on a new frame. So anyways, you get the gist of it. All right, so next up, we're gonna mount our motors. Yours won't be soldered yet, but it'd be a good idea to put them in, to bolt them in, so you know how long to trim your wires and all that. And you also need these little TPU motor dampener isolators. So you need those, and then you have about a gazillion of these M2x6 screws, but you're gonna need 4 for each motor. And remember, this is a pusher quad, so the motors go upside down. And if I remember right, it actually, I think I put the thread locker on after the fact last time, because as it goes through that TPU, it almost wipes the thread locker right off the threads of the screw. So yeah, I'll get all these started, poking through. So we got all those on. And this is gonna be the tricky part, is trying to get just a little bit of dab of thread locker on there. Not overdoing it. And I think I remember from the first time I built this, these screws are super fine, super small, and they're easy to cross thread, so make sure your motor's like really square when you start the first couple screws. And again, you're going through a TPU, so you don't want to crank them too tight. You just want to snug them. And since you're using that Loctite, once that dries, these shouldn't come out. All right, there we go. We got the motors bolted down. And in your case, if you're building this from scratch, unlike me, where I'm rebuilding this, your motor wires wouldn't be soldered yet. So this is the point where you'd want to go ahead and cut your motor wires to length and solder them. But before you do that, Your kit should come with these little motor wire tubes, and they have double-sided tape on the bottom here. And you can actually stick them on the arm underneath, run your wires through them, and then solder them. I didn't do that originally, and I had a minor crash where the wires got tangled in the props a little bit. I cut 2 motor wires there, and I think I had one back here that maybe got nicked. If you can, remember, before you solder your wires, slide them to these tubes, stick the tubes down, and that'll help keep them in place, help protect them. I have this tape I'm going to use to tape them down. All right. So something I probably should have talked about before I bolted down this flight controller was if you have any soldering to do on the other side of the board, you want to obviously do that before you bolt it down. All my soldering was already done, so I just went ahead and did it. And I've just, remembered that you guys might have something like I did. Some of these wires are soldered on the top side of the board. So like my naked GoPro power, looks like it somewhat goes under the board, like the power comes from this side, signal goes actually on this side. And then this wire harness, I believe, is for my LED BEC, which I'm not probably going to use on this one. But yeah, that comes from the other side of the board. My receiver comes from this bottom side of the board, so we're good there. But that's something that you want to consider before you bolt it down. And you may bolt it down just to see the length of the wires where you want to take them. But I just thought I'd cover that before we get any further. All right, next up we're going to mount our camera housing up front, and we're going to mount that to our top plate like this. You're going to need 2 of these M2 6 screws, and yeah, I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite on these guys before we put them in. All right, so there's that front camera housing. All right, so at this point, we got our top plate of the frame pretty close to being done. We got our motors mounted. At this point, you should have soldered your motor wires on, got your power cable on. And then for me, I like to put these little connectors. I found them on Amazon. I like to put these on my receiver, so if I ever have a problem with my receiver and I gotta take it off later, I don't have to desolder and resolder, because these pads, you'll know, they're super frustrating because they're tiny, tiny. Like so, right? So yeah, you buy this kit on Amazon. They make these plugs, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 ports. So depending on what you're putting on, like I put it on this one right here. This is for the LED connection. This one's only a 3-port. Same thing, you can just disconnect it instead of having to desolder from the board. So anyway, you should have all the soldering done at this point, ready to go, so that this top plate is pretty much complete. Yeah, we're gonna set that off to the side. So this brings me to this point where I think I mentioned earlier, this is kind of the frustrating part, because this all gets sandwiched together and it's kind of a jumbled mess when you go to do it, trying to maintain where all the wires are going so they're not getting pinched. It's super tight because once you put this air unit in, there's not a lot of room once you put it in this housing. So anyways, just take your time. You're gonna have to space this out correctly so that the wires can reach, the camera can reach where it needs to go, the antenna can reach where it needs to go. And the other frustrating part that I didn't even realize until after I put everything together is the O3 air unit. You've got your memory card slot right here. Well, there's no provision, like once you put this all together and it slides in here. There's no provision to get access once that's in there to the memory card. There is like one big hole right here, and I think on the first time I built this, I had that hole lined up. Not even, I don't think it even lines up with the USB-C. You might be able to get it to line up. Like if you ever do an update or something, you might be able to get that to line up if you mount it upside down. But yeah, that's like, if I had to say I had one complaint about this frame, is once you bolt this all together, there's no access to the memory card or this USB-C to do updates. So anytime you have to access that, which if you're flying with this as your primary camera and you want to pull footage off, then you have to unbolt this bottom plate off, and this whole thing kind of comes out as a unit out of here, and then you can get access. I think it could have been designed better. I don't think this was originally made for the 03 Air unit, so that's probably why it's like that. But I primarily use the footage off my GoPro when I'm using this thing, so in the scheme of things, it's not that big a deal, but it is, yeah, it is rather annoying. So the first thing you got to do is figure out where you're going to put everything, right? So in the old frame, I had this BEC for the LED kit. It's about the size of ELRS receiver. It's actually a little bit bigger, but it'll squeeze into this little plastic tab and hold it, so that helps retain that, right? But then you have like the pigtail coming off with this plug, which goes to your flight controller. You have this wire that goes to the LED, and then you have your receiver, the air unit, all that stuff to fit in there, to cram in there. So I guess while I have this out, one thing I'll mention, since I'm not putting the LED back in this frame, you can look how I have the wire ran, because it's not super clear. Like the instructions don't tell you how to do it, but you can see like this part is got shrink tubing on it, and I think I actually put that shrink tubing on it when I built it previously. Because if you start with this LED and you maybe you start it up here and you get you wouldn't figure it out till you get all the way around. It's going to be too long to fit in here. So if you can look at the spacing, here's the wire that goes to the BEC. If you start it right about where this standoff is, the almost landing pad, if you start it just about there and push it in, you come up pretty close over here. That's about the perfect spacing to get you all the way around and end right there. So yeah, just take note of that if you're doing the LED. I'm not going to do the LED on this one. So this little tab right here, instead of putting the BEC in there that I'm not using anymore, I can probably squeeze my receiver in there and get that out of the way. Take a little time to plan it out. We'll put that in for now. One thing I forgot to go over, because I'm using this antenna, like I said earlier, it's already put together, but you need this aluminum standoff. This slides in the bottom of this TPU mount. So you'll take this and slide it through this hole right here, like so, and it's gonna look like that. But yeah, so you see why the standoff is here now. It slides in this little receptacle there. So at any rate, I use this 3M, Scotch 3M double-side tape. The key is to get the stuff you're sticking it to really clean. So I just use rubbing alcohol to clean the surfaces of any, residue and stuff, and then I'll clean the bottom of the air unit really well. All right, it got late last night, so it's day 2. Where we left off is we got the bottom plate, got the air unit mounted to there, got our receiver antennas run through this antenna mount, our flight controller cable plugged into the air unit. So bottom plate's pretty complete. We got the main frame with our standoffs in it, and then we got our top plate with the motors mounted, everything's soldered up, or you should be at least, and flight controller mounted. Front camera housing is mounted, and your battery strap mounted and all that. So we're gonna go ahead and take this bottom plate, feed all the wires and the antennas and stuff and the camera through there. And we're not gonna secure any of that yet. We're gonna leave it loose, because before we get everything mounted, we have to, if you're gonna mount your receiver like I am, you're gonna have to squeeze it in this little plastic housing that's in the main frame. So I'm gonna do that, and then we can slap it all together. Again, this is all made easier because I put those little 2 and 3 pin connectors for the receiver. So camera should be routed out towards the front. Remember the 2 holes shows you where the front of the quad is. Your antenna should be coming out the back. Remember, you have this little standoff right here that's going to go in this standoff hole right there. And then your flight controller cable is going to be coming up, as well as your receiver cabling if you did it like I am. Flip this over and throw these screws in. The screws that go through the standoffs and then they go into the plastic, they're all going to be these M2x6 screws. So let's do the plastic ones first. And then I might throw another dab of a thread locker on the ones that go into those metal standoffs. Now we're going to throw in the same size screws are going to go through the bottom of the frame into these standoffs. So I'm going to put a little bit of thread locker on those. And there we go. We got the bottom plate mounted to the main frame, got our air unit fastened in the bottom, and we've got our cables coming up for our receiver and our flight controller ready to go. So, all right, now we're ready to connect our top plate, all electronics and motor, to the main frame and the bottom plate. So this, again, is just gonna take a little bit of time to manipulate the wires into little crevices and stuff. Because you don't want to, when you put these together, you don't want to pinch any of the wires in between these standoffs in the frame. And it's real easy to do. So take your time. It can be a little frustrating, but you'll know when you get it. First thing I'm going to do is connect the flight controller, so don't forget that. Next thing we got to do is connect the receiver. I have it wired, but I'm not using the optional naked GoPro right now, so I'm going to leave that connected. And this other harness was for the LED package that was optional also, that was on the old frame, but I'm not going to put that on this one. So those are not, I'm not going to connect anything, but we still got to find a home for them and tuck them out of the way. And then real important too is you don't want to damage this cable coming from your camera, so make sure it's tucked off to one side or the other of the standoff. And then before you bolt everything down, if you didn't run your power cable through this hole, I'm going to make sure you have it going off on one side or the other, whichever way you want it. You can see the top plate has a little recess area for the antenna mount to poke into, so that'll kind of hold things together as you do it. But yeah, you can see how tight it gets in here, like these cables are hanging up right here, so I might tuck those in differently. So that's the one bad thing about these harnesses. If you get them hung up in between the air unit and the flight controller, they get in the way and they don't want to allow you to bolt this together. So again, take your time and just make sure you're not pinching anything. All right, so we're ready to throw our screws in through the top plate into those standoffs, and those are going to be M2x6 screws. So you'll need 3 of those. And then the last one it calls for is going through the antenna mount, and that's supposed to be an M2x8. So that's this screw. It's the one screw that's silver instead of black. And that's going to go through this antenna mount here through the top frame. So do a little dab of thread locker. And this is really where you want to take your time. Maybe just get these started a little bit, but don't cinch them down. Because as you tighten them together, you want to make sure the cables are all clear between the frame and the standoffs. So yeah, just get them started like maybe 4 or 5 threads, but don't cinch them down yet. All right, so I got the 3 standoff screws started. Just verify nothing's getting pinched. You got your power cable coming out. Whatever side you want it to come out on, make sure it's there. All right, everything looks pretty good, so I'm gonna slowly cinch these down. And then just verify one more time that nothing's pinched. And I'm not seeing anything, so I think we're good. And the last part on this is just your antenna mount. All right, so the M2 screw they tell you to put through this antenna mount wouldn't reach for me. So what I ended up doing on my other build is I found this M2 x 14 screw. I believe it's pretty much the same size screw that you're going to use to mount through the bottom of this plate to go into the camera housing. Either an M2 12 or M2 14 screw should reach for you. I don't know if that's just like an oversight on their part or if I did something wrong, but it was like this on both kits that I built. Antenna's nice and mounted there. Still has some flexibility, so if you crash or bump it, it can move. All right, so we got everything pretty much connected, but we still have our camera flopping around. Here's a little piece of advice from the first time I built it. It calls to use these M2 x 6 screws. There's 4 of them. And when you put these little rubber pieces in the camera isolator, and then you pass those M6 screws through, on the last kit, I could tighten these down all the way and they were still really loose. And I felt like if I was gonna tighten them anymore, it was gonna damage the inside of the camera. So what I did, and I can't remember where I got these washers, but I may have bought a little kit off of Amazon with these little M2 washers. But what I found was if I stacked 2 of these washers and put it on the screw, the little M2 6 screw, it was perfect to get tight enough on the camera, but not feel like it was gonna damage it. So yeah, let's put your little rubber isolators in the camera mount. Thread your camera through. Make sure you got it right side up. And this will help hold those little rubber pieces in. So yeah, get your camera holes lined up with the rubber isolator holes. Two of those M2 washers on an M2 6 screw. And just get those started. We're not going to tighten them up completely yet. We're pretty close to being done. I'm going to throw this zip tie on this power wire before I forget. Getting close, a couple little finishing touches. Here's a little battery pad. Pop the little centerpiece out. Get that lined up and on. We still have our GoPro plate to put on, but you're gonna secure these on with the M315 half tooth screws, they call them. So just 4 of those, and throw a little thread locker on. There we go. Only thing we got left to do now is put the props on. All right, last bit of work we have to do is put our props on. It does get a little confusing because this is a pusher quad. So I've got mine set up the standard way in Betaflight. So these front props are going to spin in, as well as the back props are going to spin this way. So I get those oriented correctly, but it gets a little confusing because now you're going to flip the quad over, right? And you want these props to swap because I flipped it. But when you go to put them on, you're not going to put them on like a standard motor because it's a pusher. So the props are actually going to get put on upside down. It can be a little confusing, but just take your time, set it up. So let's check it again. So yeah, these props are going to spin in this way. And then these guys are going to spin this way. And the screws are going to use, don't believe they come in the kit. I think they come with your motors, but they're going to be M2x8. We're going to throw a little thread locker on them because you don't want to be losing a prop. All right, here she is, guys, all completed, all put back together, brand new again. The only thing we got left to do is charge a battery, mount a GoPro, and take her out on our maiden voyage. Let's go do it.
Ojo, 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 ojo.